Today I'm speaking with Alyssa Booth. Alyssa, she, her, is a wife, mum of 3, friend, Christian and fierce advocate. Alyssa lives in the Illawarra region on Dharawal country. She has a big passion for homebirth and continuity of midwifery care, whilst also being passionate and in supporting hospital births. A doula for 8 years now, Alyssa has established a consistent business in the doula world, expanding her business to include baby-wearing education and volunteer work with not-for-profits and charities. I hope you enjoyed listening to our conversation, and you can find out more about Alyssa through the links in the show notes. Welcome to the Whole Doula podcast. The Whole Doula podcast is a conversation space for doulas and birth workers to talk about the diverse paths that led them to birth work, as well as the diverse and unique skills, interests and offerings they bring to their birth-keeping roles. Here I dive into conversations with others who may be wondering how to bring the different aspects and experiences of their own lives into their roles as doulas in business. After all, there is more than one way to doula, and I'd love to help others see the connections between all the different parts of themselves, to see themselves as a whole doula. I am your host, Mary Giordano, doula, birth educator, counsellor and doula business mentor, and this is the Whole Doula podcast. I hope you enjoy listening. Hi Alyssa, lovely to have you here on the Whole Doula podcast. Thank you so much for joining me. I'd love to start by hearing you just share with the listeners whereabouts you're based, firstly, as well as how you refer to yourself or what your title is in birth keeping.
Hi, thanks so much for having me. I am located in Dharawal country, so Illawarra down in the south coast of New South Wales. It's absolutely stunning day today, not much wind and some sun, which is so lovely. Can definitely handle winter when it's like this. And I usually will call myself a birth doula and a childbirth educator.
And how long have you been in business for?
So I studied to become a doula when my daughter was 1, I think. So I've been doulaing as a job for around about 8 years. Had some time off to have some more babies. But I first attended my very first birth over 12 years ago. Back then I didn't know what doulaing was, but it was absolutely the role I played for that family. But officially around about 8 years.
Amazing. Thank you so much. So I'd love to hear how you came to attend that birth 12 years ago before you even knew what a doula was.
Yeah, it was a friend of mine having a baby and there wasn't a partner around at the time. And we know that it's not exactly the ideal thing to be doing by yourself. So she invited me into the space and it was big. It was an induction on Christmas Eve and,
oh, wow.
You know, we can imagine how that went with time restraints and things. But yeah, it was an eye-opening experience to be the support person for someone else.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And at that stage, you hadn't had your first child yet, or you had? No, okay.
No.
So eye-opening experience, but it was 4 years before you then sort of moved into the doula work space, I suppose, and started your own business. So how did that happen? How did you then move from there to doulaing 4 years later? What sort of was that path like?
So I was the friend and family member who, when people had babies, was always around to help out and hang out and have cups of tea or change nappies, whatever. And my older cousin had twins a couple of years before I had my first. And I spent a lot of time at her place when the twins were little and fresh and as they grew up. So I had that experience of newborns and thought, sweet, I've been around babies, I've been around new mums. When we eventually fell pregnant and had our baby, I thought it was going to be the same. But by that stage, a lot of my friends and family had their babies. And so it's a little bit harder logistically to drop everything and come over and support when you're deep in toddlerhood and germs and all the things that come with that. And so I found it was actually quite a different experience to what I expected. A little bit odd, not lonely as such. I had people around and had a village, but it was just different to what I thought. And so my baby was given that classic colic diagnosis, which looking back now, I don't think it was that at all, but it meant we spent a lot of time up overnight with a baby that was trying to be settled. And I remember one of the nights researching about what I wanted to do as a future career. At that time, I was a swim teacher and I liked it, but I wasn't sure I wanted to go back to it. And I remember finding midwifery and I was like, oh, I don't think I can tackle uni with a little baby. I'm very much when I need to study, it has to be in person. If it's online, I won't do it. And so I knew I couldn't do midwifery at a Sydney uni, and found doula work and found that in other countries, sometimes they're covered by Medicare. Sometimes it's just a normal thing. Everybody has doulas and all that sort of thing. But yeah, found that there was a college in Australia, and at that time there wasn't a lot around that was easily accessible. So I went and studied. Thankfully, my mum and my mother-in-law helped with that. They watched my daughter every second Friday when I needed to go up. They took it in turns, which was really nice for their relationship as well. Mm-hmm. They got to hang out quite frequently. Yeah, studied and did my 3 student doula births, and then that was that.
Mm-hmm. Amazing. So some people listening may not know what's involved in a doula training course, and the people I've spoken to so far, we haven't really touched on that explicitly. So when you say you went up, you went from Illawarra to where did you go to?
Sydney. I was travelling to Sydney.
Okay.
Yeah.
And who did you do training with?
I went through Australian Doula College.
Okay. And so what did that look like in terms of commitment of time? You said it was every second Friday?
Yeah. So I chose the in-person Sydney course. COVID changed their offerings, obviously, like a lot of us. So they've got various options now. But at that time, that was one of the only ones. And so every second Friday, my husband and I would go to Sydney on the train together. He was working in Sydney at that time, so that was kind of nice. It gave us a little bit of extra hangout time during the week. Mm-hmm. So we'd travel up to Sydney together. He'd go off to work and I'd go off to college, spend the day there, and then we'd go back home. So we were gone from, I think, 6 a.m. to 7 p.m. maybe. It's a long time for the grandparents to be looking after a little wild child. And I did that. It was about 6 months. Mm-hmm. And we had homework and assignments and things that we had to complete at home between those in-person classes. And then there was a bit more work to do after the 6 months, and then the 3 student doulas. So the 3 student births, you had to find 3 women that wanted a doula, work with them, and they had to give feedback to the college about how a relationship went. And then you had postnatal work as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so it sounds like quite a comprehensive. How many months did you say that went for?
It was about 6 months.
Okay. Yeah. And so when you finished that course, did you feel, and you'd attended your 3 births as a student, and you'd already attended one 4 years prior to that, did you feel prepared to go out and into the world as a doula, to call yourself a doula, to work as a doula, to start a business? Or was it just the stepping stone towards next kind of learning curve?
I was ready to be a doula, ready to run a business. Absolutely not. That's one of the things that I do talk to people about when they say they're going to become a doula or study a various course, is they often don't give you the business skills or much information about running a business. And most people will want to make some money from it or run it as a business. And so trying to do that whilst I had babies and postpartum brain and all of that, it was a struggle. Mm-hmm. But, I felt confident as a doula and walking into that support role. Mm-hmm. Possibly not as equipped as I needed to be to juggle the relationship with client and the relationship with hospital. I think that purely comes out of time and time spent with the staff there. Mm-hmm. There's quite a few doulas in the Illawarra who don't do hospital births just out of choice. And I support quite a few families in both our public and private hospitals here. So navigating that system on top of working with your clients mm-hmm. is probably the thing that took me the longest.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's certainly something that a lot of birth workers grapple with. Just a little break from our conversation to let you know that I'm currently working on the Savvy Doula, an intensive business program for doulas to help you up-level your business acumen to ensure that your dream work is not just fulfilling your heart's calling, but also sustainable and financially viable for the long term. The Savvy Doula will be launching early in 2024. To express your interest, send me an email at hello@marygiordano.com.au or connect with me on Instagram at marygiordano.com.au. And as you alluded to there, many have stopped attending hospitals altogether, and I'm sure that's for a whole range of reasons. But it does require, significant additional understanding and, I suppose, tact and skills to be able to navigate that space and staying authentic in your relationship with your client, whilst also sort of trying to maintain positive rapport with the other people. I've actually just literally 15 minutes gotten off a call with my live call with my mentoring group called the Intuitive Doula, and we're talking this fortnight about developing rapport with other care providers. So we've just been talking about that. It was very interesting. Like you said, a lot of people finish their doula training and they might feel, really ready to support birth, but perhaps not so much to start a business or to even understand what's involved in a business. And in my experience, a lot of the doula training pathways don't really have adequate teachings or support around the business development. But I think also lived experience is where we tend to get the most confidence. So even if I'm just wondering, even if there were that built into the courses, I think it's still theory until it's practice, and it's not practice until you've had the experience. So I think those things should be part of the doula training organisations, particularly if people plan to turn their work into a business. But I'm curious, even if they were, if people would actually be more confident in starting a business, or if it would still be as challenging. Be curious to see.
I think it would still be challenging, but maybe even just simple things like, if numbers aren't your jam, invest in an accountant because that's their jam and they love that stuff. Or, find someone who's further along in the business journey and ask them, where do I start? Like if it's feeling overwhelming, reach out to people. I think it's very easy in our sort of society to pit women against each other, and rather than collaborate or get mentors or work together, it's competitive. Well, there's thousands of women having a baby. It's going to be fine. We don't need to act out of like a scarcity model, but you find women who are further along in the journey and ask them about it. Yeah.
That's a great tip. And a couple of things you touched on I think are really important. One, so there's lots of women having babies. There's space for everyone, collaboration over competition. Interestingly, you said there are a lot of birth workers in the Illawarra region. Where I live, we've got a huge lack. So there are very few. There's actually, I think it's just myself. There were a couple of others that have been supporting births for years who are both no longer supporting births. And so we have kind of the opposite problem where we don't have enough birth keepers, and I have to turn people away, and have really quite firm boundaries in place in terms of the distance that I'll travel, because I'm talking about quite a large area. This is Central Victoria. It's quite a large area, and not enough doulas. So it's interesting, we have quite different experiences in those, perhaps in the cities where there's more doulas. I'm curious, you mentioned that you would suggest to new doulas to find mentorship or to explore that possibility. I think that's a great tip. I'd love to hear your thoughts on how that might look and how people might actually seek a mentor or engage into a relationship like that, and sort of what that even means to you, whether you're talking about sort of a formal mentorship like an online mentorship program, or if you're talking more of sort of shadowing and actually, working alongside somebody to learn on the job. Which were you sort of referring to there or thinking about?
I think it can go either way. I think it depends on what that particular doula needs. If someone has completed their doula course, or maybe they're not going to do one, but they still want to get into doula work, then maybe shadowing might work. But obviously that's going to be reliant on the doula who she wants to shadow, the family that doula is working with currently, whether that extra person in the space is really going to be a hindrance, because some women are more sensitive to that with their oxytocin levels. So sometimes that is a good approach. I think also just having someone who's further along that you can call and say, hey, had a really crappy birth. Can we meet up to debrief? Because you get it. You get the confidentiality. You get the system that, we're up against. And I think having someone that you can call and say, I just need to get it all off. So then it's shifted. And when you go back to your client, you then have the space to hold for them, have whatever feelings about their birth that they need. That's been a really big benefit to me. I have a couple of doulas or even some private midwives that I can do that with. And my dad's a nurse, so sometimes I come home from births and I'll just go to him and be like, what the hell? And talk to him a bit about the system or the staff or the lack of consent attitude, whatever it might be. And I know he gets it because he's in health, and he can also then go, that's really wrong. Here's the pathways to lodge a complaint or to navigate that next time. So having people that can also give you really good feedback.
Okay.
I think in terms of formal mentorship, it probably depends where you're at in your business.
Mm.
If you're not making enough money to pay for something like that, I think sometimes it's quite easy if people have privilege to say, we'll just invest in a mentorship program and forget about the fact that sometimes this is a really big side hustle or a stretch, or it's someone who has a little baby and they can't necessarily do that. So I like to try and also just do the informal stuff of, I've seen a bunch of new doulas in the Illawarra, let's reach out, let's try to build a community. Because when I first came as a doula, there wasn't that much of a community and connection. So one of the things I'm trying really hard to do here is try to get all the doulas connected and make sure, opposite problem to you, that if we have a firm boundary and we're done for the month, we know who works in a similar capacity and we can give those client inquiries a list of options that they could contact. Or if a new doula maybe feels like she's out of her depth, then she can call us in the middle of a birth and say, this is happening, what tips have you got? And rather than it being a financial investment, it's an investment in more families in the Illawarra, but also just those doulas' futures, because there just seems to be such a really high burnout rate with doulas, which I think is similar to midwives. But even some of the doulas, probably most of the doulas that I studied with, aren't doing it anymore.
Yeah, that's definitely a recurrent theme, isn't it, in this area of work, the burnout within the first few years, I think, usually, and that struggle to navigate that sort of line between a passion and a business and figuring out which is which and which is where and all of that. You touched on a lot of things there. I love that you've got this multi-layered support around you where you can debrief with doulas, midwives, and even your dad as a nurse, and having probably a bit of nuance in those three different perspectives. Super important to be able to debrief, as you said, when we have difficult births. So, and I hear you saying, of course, for people who are emerging in this space, maybe, you know, investing in a financial or having to make a financial investment to engage in a formal mentorship program might be unattainable. But how can we work together anyway? How can we support each other? And I love that you're sort of doing that work in your community to try and foster an improved sense of connection for the new doulas, and also developing their capacity and validating their place as well as new doulas in this space. That's really lovely to hear. So I'm curious, what does a typical day look like for you, Alyssa? Are you working full-time in your business now? Do you have another job, or is this it for you, the doula business, and that's kind of providing for your family and like a sustainable business by now?
So I'm very lucky that my husband works full-time hours, and that's enough to cover the big bills. Look, for how long with these interest rate rises, who knows? But at the moment, we're doing okay. And so I am a birth doula, and then my childbirth education course, Illawarra birth classes, I started that maybe 5 years ago with another local doula who has since moved over to Perth, but we still run that. So a year ago, moved into a bigger studio space, which was a big commitment to lease a bigger space. Up until then, we'd been using community halls and then a local photographer's studio. So to make the commitment to move into a more formal lease with a bigger space that, you know, required work and renovations and fit out and all of that, we made that decision when we moved in a year ago.
Mm-hmm.
So I run those birth classes, a few classes every month. And then during the week, my youngest is 4. And so he's still in preschool. So he goes to preschool 2 days a week. So those are generally my work days. So I'll try to do admin or pre or postnatal visits. On Thursday mornings, I run a free mum lounge. So I just open up the studio, don't have to book, don't have to pay. Mums can just drop in, come as they are, dressed up, not dressed up, rough night, great night, it doesn't matter. There's just a lounge and a cuppa and some snacks and space for toddlers to explore, and that will remain free for as long as I can keep it free, because to me it's a vital part of my doula work, and being able to have that space is really nice. So then occasionally through the week I might have to do pre or postnatal visits at night times, depending what's happening with the families I'm working with. I think 9 years in, I'm a lot more confident in my boundaries. I won't work all the time. Now that my youngest is 4 and he's our last baby, I'm trying to just soak up all the moments with my kids, because once you're on the other side of that newborn intensity, you realize how quickly those seasons fly by. And so I'm trying to just make the most of family as well. And I can afford to do that because hubby has a full-time job, but my businesses are at a place where I feel confident to put those boundaries in place and stick to them.
It's so reassuring, hopefully, for people who are maybe at the start of their journey to know that the hard work does pay off. And, you know, at some point, whether that's 9 years down the track or sooner or later, if you are in it for the long haul, you just keep pivoting and problem solving and figuring it out until you find a way to make it work. And it's great when you get to that position where, as you said, you can have the boundaries in place and maybe not work as much as you did or people might want you to, and, you know, pick up and let off and just figure it out, you know, based on suits you and your family. I'm in a similar place now, and it's really, I think it's important to point out to those who might be emerging in the space, particularly looking at maybe more established doulas online, because that's what we seem to come across most people. It can be really intimidating. And I remember when I was starting out looking at the doulas that were more established and thinking, how would I ever establish myself? How would anybody ever hire me and pay me to support them? Like, I just don't see how this would ever work. And I'm only in business now for 5 years, but I'm already at that point, and it's great. It's great to be in that position, but it's been a lot of hard work. Like, it has been a huge amount of work, and most of the work's invisible. You know, what we post on social media is really like, it's insignificant compared to the amount of work that we put into our businesses as sole traders doing all of the things. So it's hard work, but if you are determined, you can make it work.
100%.
Yeah.
And I think knowing your capacity. So I often will look at doulas on social media and be like, oh, maybe they take on so many and look at their business, it's thriving. But I have 3 kids and 2 in school and after school activities, and I don't know about anybody else, but we and everybody we know has been smashed with childhood sickness the last 18 months and childbirth classes. So juggling all of that, I don't take on multiple clients a month. I'll do 1 or 2 estimated due dates in a month, and that's it. I'm very deliberate about that. And that's because I know my capacity. And if I was to take on more, I wouldn't be turning up to those births at my best. And I think that's a disservice to the family. So while other doulas might have capacity for more, that's their business and that works for them. And I think it's really important for emerging doulas to find what works for them, for their family balance, and stick to it. Yes, it's really hard to say no to families, but if you say yes, you're going to be saying no somewhere else in your life or to another client. And so I think remembering that your business is your business and you don't have to reach anybody else's expectations. You need to find what works for your capacity.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. But I think that I would challenge that we need to sort of identify it and stick to it, because I think things change over time. That's my experience anyway. And what that season, what that capacity might look like this year could be very different to how it looks next year or last year, influenced by a whole range of factors and, you know, the level of support or absence of support that we have around us. I know you said that you live next door to your folks. So I wonder if they provide some support for you when you're on call and having to rush off to a birth, for example, because for some people, even attending 1 or 2 births a month would feel like a stretch. You know, we can look at those who might be attending 6 and think, oh, I'm only attending 1 or 2, but others who are only attending a few births a year would be maybe thinking, oh gosh, I'd love to be able to attend 1 or 2 births a month. How do I make that work with balancing, you know, and we don't know what's happening in people's lives. So I think it's important, just another reminder to only sort of take what we see online with a grain of salt and remember to stay focused on ourselves. And if we're finding that we're feeling imposter syndrome maybe coming up as a result of what we're seeing others doing, or comparison, like this comparison trap, then we can actually unfollow. And, you know, we can set boundaries around the amount that we consume, because we're responsible and accountable for what we bring into our awareness. Nobody's making us consume all of that. Yes. So if it's not making you feel good, then, you know, do something about it. Just like we hold our clients accountable for their journey, right? But we're also accountable for our journey. So it's, there's so much mirroring. I'm curious to know what do you enjoy most about your work, Alyssa?
Ooh, so much. I think there's a couple of big things that stand out when I get asked this question. Watching women or birthing parents realize their strength. And so I think it's either they realize it in that birth and they go through and think they can't do anymore, and then they do more and they realize how strong they really are. Or it's they've had a birth that didn't go how they wanted, or there's, a birth that they're unhappy with, and then they come to me for a subsequent birth and they realize it in that journey of processing that previous birth, finding what they want for that one and working hard for it. And they realize how strong they are. They speak up for themselves. They find a new level of strength or a new voice inside of them. So I love watching people realize just how strong and capable they are.
Mm-hmm.
Watching babies restitute. So as their head's born, then there's that pause, those shoulders rotate. I love that. It's such a reminder to me that they are active participants. They're their own little humans. They have their own thoughts and their own little personality and character traits that are going to unfold. And watching them do that movement, it's just such a really great reminder of how much they're their own little human that is part of that birth process. Mum's working really hard, support team are working hard, but so are the babies.
Mm-hmm.
And I love that moment. Often love the looks on partners' faces when they see that, because they're like, what is happening? But that moment is one of my favorites. And then watching the partners as they level up in love and respect for their person is always really beautiful. I think Hollywood does a disservice to birth in so many ways, but one of the things that they often will portray is this really aggressive, hand-breaking, shouting, you're never going to touch me again sort of model of women in birth. And it's so often not like that.
Mm-hmm.
There might be the odd comment in the middle of a contraction, but it's so often just this loved up space. And watching families go to a whole nother level of love and respect. Yeah, it's really nice.
Yeah, I love it. That's one of my absolute favourite things, as well as observing the partners. Not at any point necessarily, but just watching them, watching their loved one, and just wishing that the loved one who is labouring could see the way that they're being watched by their partner, because it's usually, in my experience as well, almost all the births I've been to, it's a bubble of incredible love and respect and just awe. And it's such an honour to be able to witness that. Actually, it's one of my favourite things. So I love that you spoke to that. And maybe a predictable question, but on the reverse, what do you find the most challenging?
Ooh, I think having respectful conversations about the system. So obviously, as someone with multiple family members and friends in the health system, I'm always quite conscious that it's not necessarily an individual thing, it's a system. But 98% of the population in our space, at least, is choosing to birth in that system, or maybe not choosing, but birthing in the hospital system. And so trying to prepare families adequately without scaring them or being disrespectful in any way, particularly if you've just come off a bad birth or a bad debrief or something and that anger and rage is there. I think sometimes that can be really challenging to navigate those conversations, because it is often seen as the safest place to birth our babies. So sometimes that can be a bit tricky. And probably the being on call.
Mm-hmm.
It means that you don't go on family holidays. You're often constantly have your phone on you or within arm's reach, or every time it goes off, you got to check it just in case it's a client. And I think the older my kids get, the more aware I am of that. Obviously, we didn't grow up seeing our parents have phones all the time, and I don't necessarily want them to see that. And so just being aware of how I navigate that on-call period, I'm just trying to do it differently. That's been really something in the last 12 months. And I also have been very deliberate about having 2 times a year where I'm not on call. I can just switch off, have a break, get decent sleep, because I'm not sleeping waiting for my phone to go off in the middle of the night. That's been something that I took from one of our local midwives. I've noticed over the last few years that she's just unavailable for 2 certain parts of the year. And it's like, why aren't I doing that? Why am I running my business thinking I have to be on call all year round? Because I just don't think it's sustainable. So you're trying to navigate that, because it can be tricky.
Yeah, that definitely can be. And the two challenges that you spoke of are two things that I find very challenging too. That conversation of that line between, showing up with confidence and positivity for the person that you're supporting who's choosing to birth at hospital. And I also challenge that they may be birthing in hospital where that's not a choice. I think that is a choice. There's always alternate choices, I believe, even if it doesn't feel that the alternate choices are desirable. It's a really tricky one to navigate, particularly, as you said, if we're on the back of a difficult birth or a difficult debrief or something, and we've got some feelings towards a system, and how do we stay constructive and positive and work constructively with those in the system to try and, work towards the best outcome possible for the family. That's really difficult. And also the on-call, I think it's a great one to speak to for people thinking of becoming doulas or emerging in this space as well, who, we don't really know until we don't know what we don't know. So we don't know what we haven't experienced. And the things that you talked about there are things that you've learned through experience of being on call, and really important to take time. So, thinking about how to build that into your year. And I'm curious for you what that looks like, those two periods. Is it always the same periods of the year, those two periods, or does it change? Like, do you just sort of determine that you want to be off call for, such and such and such and such time? Or, how does that actually work for you?
It's changed over the years. The last few years have said to my husband, okay, I'm going to have December off. I won't be on call this year. I'm a huge Christmas fanatic. So 1st of December, carols are up, decorations are up. It was a lot earlier in COVID lockdowns and we did all the things. And then all the inquiries roll in, all the other doulas go off call. And I think, I'm just going to take on a couple of births, Ben, and then I'll have January off. And so that's what's happened the last few years. But this year, I am having December off. I've already turned down a bunch of inquiries and it feels awful and amazing all at the same time. So this year it'll be December and then it will just shift. My best friend is planning on having her second baby sometime next year. So I'll make sure she lives 5 hours away. She lives out in Wagga, and I will go out and support her. So the time off will vary depending when she's due to have her baby. And other times it might be, I think this year I'm having time off around my birthday so we can go away on a holiday. And I think it just varies depending what the family needs and what business looks like in the Illawarra.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you for sharing that experience. That December-January period is something that I've been thinking about a lot too, because I wasn't on call last year at that period. I was the year before and I will be this year, but I've just declined a second year. I've got 2 in December, 2 EDD, 1 on 25th of December, and then 1 in 12th of Jan. I've just had another inquiry for Jan, and I said if it's like in the first week, then I'll consider it, because I'm happy to be on call for another one. But if it's later in the month, no, because I want to have a bit of holiday time with my family whilst they're on holidays. And once you do have kids who may be going to school, it's something to consider that, kids are on holidays several times a year. And if you're on call all the time and your family likes to go camping, then you don't get to go with them. That's my experience. Anyway, and in part, I really love that space by myself, but it's a huge commitment for my partner as well to pick that up and do it on his own. So, yeah, thank you for raising that. Some really important considerations for people who may not be thinking about that yet, or maybe thinking about that and wondering what it looks like. So just one final question, Alyssa. Aside from the things that you've already mentioned, is there anything else that you would suggest to a new or emerging person considering working in the doula space or the birth space?
I think know what your values and ethics are, and they'll probably change over time. But if you know your core values, you build your business around that. Quite often those will be challenged throughout the process, whether that's with a client that doesn't gel with you or something to do with the system or a care provider. But knowing at the end of the day that you're working with integrity means that you can switch off and go to sleep with peace, because you're not questioning that side of things. And I think always trying to have doulas that you can refer to or reach out to, because it is a service job, but it's also very much heart, emotion, business. And so being able to switch off the business side, you might still carry the heart and emotion for a little bit, and having people you can go to really will make the business sustainable.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Where can people find you? And I'd love to make a note as well. You said that your birth education is called Illawarra Birth something, was it? You can
Illawarra birth classes.
Yeah, birth classes. Okay. So if you send me your info, I'll share that in the show notes. Alyssa, thank you so much. Thanks for speaking with me on the Whole Doula podcast today. I really enjoyed having you. And yeah, I hope the listeners enjoy this conversation and find some insight in your experience. So I really appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a lovely conversation.
Pleasure. I hope you enjoyed listening to my conversation with Alyssa today. I really liked hearing how her journey in the birth work has evolved over the past 8 years and how many birth workers there are in the Illawarra region, and also how she enjoys both attending hospital and home births. I hope you enjoyed listening, and once again, if you'd like to get in touch with Alyssa, you can find out the links in the show notes. Thanks so much for listening to the Whole Doula podcast with Mary Giordano. I hope you enjoyed listening to our conversation today. If so, please hit subscribe and consider leaving a review wherever you listen to your podcasts. I'll be back with another episode in 2 weeks. Have a beautiful day.